On Saturday, January 10, 2026, Bob Weir, the rhythm guitarist and co-founder of the Grateful Dead, died at age 78 after beating cancer but succumbing to underlying lung issues. For over 60 years, Weir shaped American music, helped define the counterculture movement, and created a legacy that transformed how we think about live performance and what it means to be a musician. This is the story of the kid who got kicked out of every school he attended, met a banjo player on New Year's Eve when he was just 16, and helped build one of the most influential bands in music history. Robert Hall Weir was born on October 16, 1947, in San Francisco, California, though his birth name was actually Robert Hall Parber. His biological parents gave him up for adoption, and he was raised by his adoptive parents in Atherton, California. From the beginning, Bob struggled in traditional settings because he had undiagnosed dyslexia, which made school incredibly difficult. He wasn't just a troublemaker, he was expelled from nearly every school he attended, including Menlo School in Atherton and Fountain Valley School in Colorado. But it was at Fountain Valley where he met John Perry Barlow, who would later become one of the Grateful Dead's most important lyricists. Music wasn't Bob's first choice because he tried piano and trumpet first, but at age 13, he picked up a guitar and everything changed. The entire course of American music changed on New Year's Eve in 1963 in Palo Alto, California. 16-year-old Bob Weir and a friend were looking for a club that would let them in when they heard banjo music, so they followed the sound to Dana Morgan's music store, where they found 21-year-old Jerry Garcia waiting for students. They spent the entire night playing music together, and by the end of it, they decided to form a band. A 16-year-old kid who'd been kicked out of almost every school he'd attended meets a guy 5 years older in a music store, and within hours, they're planning to make music together. That spontaneous decision would eventually lead to over 2,300 concerts, millions of devoted fans, and a cultural movement that's still alive today. The band went through a few iterations, starting as Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions in 1964, then becoming the Warlocks, and finally in 1965, they became the Grateful Dead when Bob was just 17 years old. The other members called him the Kid. Years later, Weir explained what pushed them forward by saying, "The Beatles were why we turned from a jug band into a rock and roll band. What we saw them doing was impossibly attractive. I couldn't think of anything else more worth doing." From 1965 to 1968, Bob Weir lived at one of the most famous addresses in American counterculture history, which was 710 Ashbury Street in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district. He shared the house with Jerry Garcia, Bill Kreutzmann, Phil Lesh, and Ron "Pigpen" McKernan. Haight-Ashbury in the mid-1960s had become the epicenter of the hippie counterculture movement because affordable housing attracted musicians, artists, and idealists. The Grateful Dead weren't just living there, they were helping to create the entire scene. On January 14, 1967, the Human Being took place in Golden Gate Park, which was the event where Timothy Leary coined his famous phrase, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." This was the prelude to the Summer of Love, which happened just a few months later when an estimated 100,000 young people converged on the neighborhood. The Grateful Dead became synonymous with this movement because they represented something different from other bands. They were anti-establishment and communal, and they genuinely seemed to care more about the experience than the money. They did something almost unthinkable by allowing fans to freely record and tape their concerts, which wasn't just generous, it was revolutionary. This created a devoted fanbase called Deadheads who didn't just listen to albums, they traded tapes, followed the band from city to city, and became part of a community. Not everything was peace and love, though, because on October 2, 1967, Bob and Ron McKernan were arrested at 710 Ashbury for marijuana possession during a police raid. Bob Weir wasn't just Jerry Garcia's rhythm guitarist, he was a songwriter who helped create some of the most beloved songs in the Grateful Dead's catalog. He co-wrote Sugar Magnolia, One More Saturday Night, Mexicali Blues, the other one, Jack Straw, and Me and My Uncle. With John Perry Barlow, his old friend from boarding school, he wrote Cassidy, Estimated Profit, and Throwing Stones. And then there was Playing in the Band, which became the most played live song in Grateful Dead history. The Grateful Dead appeared at every major festival you've heard of from that era, including the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, Woodstock in 1969, and the Festival Express Train Tour across Canada in 1970. They were actually scheduled to play Altamont Free Concert in 1969 but withdrew due to security concerns, which was a decision that looked very wise in hindsight. The Grateful Dead didn't just tour, they redefined what it meant to tour. Between 1965 and 1995, they performed 2,318 concerts, and by 1995, an estimated 25 million people had seen them live. Some individual concerts drew up to 80,000 people. In September 1977, they played at Raceway Park in Old Bridge Township, New Jersey, to 107,019 people, which held the record for the largest U.S. single-act ticketed concert for 47 years until George Strait broke it in 2024. Their largest overall concert was Summer Jam at Watkins Glen in 1973 with an estimated 600,000 people, though they shared the stage with the Allman Brothers Band and the band. For most of their career, the Grateful Dead weren't really a radio band because they only had one top 40 single. Touch of Grey, in 1987 reached number 9 on the Hot 100, and that song came from the album, In the Dark, which hit number 6 on the Billboard 200 and became their best-selling album. Between January and August of 1987 alone, the band grossed more than $32 million. Here's something that shows how their influence grew over time. On December 4, 2025, the Grateful Dead earned a Guinness World Record for the most top 40 albums on the Billboard 200 with 66 albums, breaking the previous record of 59 that had been tied between Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley. They weren't chasing hits, they were building a relationship with their audience that transcended the normal artist-fan dynamic. Jerry Garcia died on August 9, 1995, when he was 53 years old, and the Grateful Dead disbanded following his death. For Bob Weir, who had spent 30 years with the band, literally more than half his life, this must have been devastating. He'd started when he was 17 and was now 47, but he didn't stop making music. Over the next 3 decades, Bob played in a series of bands and projects including Rat Dog, The Other Ones, The Dead, Further, and in 2018, he formed Bobby Weir and Wolf Brothers with Don Was and Jay Lane. The Wolf Brothers project showed a different side of Bob because between 2022 and 2025, he collaborated with major symphony orchestras. He played with the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center for a 4-night sold-out run, plus the Stanford Symphony Orchestra, the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, the Cincinnati Pops, the Chicago Philharmonic, and the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra. During the pandemic, he worked on an opera, a memoir, and a concerto grosso, and he signed with Jack White's Third Man Records. This wasn't a musician coasting on nostalgia, this was someone still exploring and still creating. That in 2015, 20 years after Jerry Garcia's death, Bob Weir formed Dead & Company with Mickey Hart, Bill Kreutzmann, John Mayer on guitar and vocals, Odile Burbridge on bass, and Jeff Chimenti on keyboards. Some people were skeptical about John Mayer joining the group, but he proved himself night after night. Over the next decade, Dead & Company performed over 350 shows across 10 national tours and set venue records at Wrigley Field with 10 shows and Folsom Field with 13 shows. Then came the Sphere in Las Vegas, where the residency called Dead Forever ran for 48 shows. They sold 477,000 tickets and grossed nearly $200 million, and Rolling Stone called it the most dazzling visual show in Grateful Dead history. They announced a final tour in 2023 but continued with additional performances in 2024 and 2025 at the Sphere. The Grateful Dead's 60th anniversary fell in August 2025, so Dead & Company scheduled 3 shows at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco on August 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The dates coincided with what would have been Jerry Garcia's 83rd birthday. Approximately 180,000 people attended over the 3 nights, with roughly 60,000 per show. Fans came from all 50 states and 16 countries, and the city estimated an economic impact of $150 million. What the crowd didn't know was that Bob Weir had been diagnosed with cancer just 1 month earlier in July 2025, and he begun treatment only weeks before these shows. On August 3, 2025, the final song Bob Weir ever performed was Touch of Grey, the same song that had given the Grateful Dead their only top 40 hit 38 years earlier. After the shows, Bob said, "60 years, I'd say that's a damn good start." Bob Weir died on Saturday, January 10, 2026, at his home, surrounded by loved ones. His family posted a statement on Instagram saying, he transitioned peacefully, surrounded by loved ones, after courageously beating cancer as only Bobby could. Unfortunately, he succumbed to underlying lung issues. The statement continued, for over 60 years, Bobby took to the road. A guitarist, vocalist, storyteller, and founding member of the Grateful Dead. Bobby will forever be a guiding force whose unique artistry reshaped American music. He often spoke of a 300-year legacy, determined to ensure the songbook would endure long after him. The Empire State Building lit up in tie-dye colors on Saturday night. Trey Anastasio, who had opened for Weir's final performance in August, said, "This one really hurts. I really loved him. He was a sweet, kind, gentle friend, and I never believed this would happen so soon." He shared a story Bob had told him about the acid tests, saying, he said after the second or third acid test, he looked down at his homework and said, "Nah," and that was it. The rest of his life was on the road. Don Was, who played with Bob and Wolf Brothers for 7 years, said, "The music he helped create over the last 60 years will continue to be felt for generations. As he sang in one of my favorite Dead songs, the music will never stop." Andy Cohen wrote, "Bob Weir wasn't the other one, he was that guy. He was impossibly beautiful and wildly fiery, intense and passionate. Bobby will live through the music and the people who love it around the world forever." With Bob's death, Bill Kreutzmann, now 79 years old, became the only surviving original member of the Grateful Dead. Ron "Pigpen" McKernan died in 1973 at age 27, Jerry Garcia died in 1995 at age 53, Phil Lesh died in October 2024 at age 84, and now Bob Weir at 78. Nearly 18,000 digital files of Grateful Dead concerts from 1965 onwards are available on the Internet Archive because the band encouraged recording and taping. There's a documented history of their evolution, their improvisation, and their relationship with their audience. By the mid-1990s, bands including Phish, Widespread Panic, and Blues Traveler had built on the foundation the Grateful Dead created. The entire jam band movement, with its emphasis on improvisation and the importance of live performance over studio perfection, all traces back to what Bob Weir and the Grateful Dead were doing. Bob Weir was a kid who couldn't fit into the traditional education system, who got expelled from school after school, and who had dyslexia that wasn't diagnosed or understood. He could have been written off, but instead, he picked up a guitar at 13, met Jerry Garcia on New Year's Eve when he was 16, and helped create music that shaped American culture. For 60 years, he took to the road and played 2,318 concerts with the Grateful Dead, then hundreds more with Dead and Company and his other projects. He performed just 5 months before his death at Golden Gate Park, already in cancer treatment, still giving everything he had to the music and the people who loved it. His family said he often spoke of a 300-year legacy, determined to ensure the songbook would endure long after him. When you consider the recordings, the songs, and the community that exists today, that's not an unrealistic goal. Bob Weir started playing guitar 70 years ago in 1956, formed the Grateful Dead 60 years ago in 1965, and performed his last show 6 months ago. And the music, as Don Was said, will never stop. That 16-year-old kid who followed banjo music into a music store on New Year's Eve helped change everything. Rest in peace, Bobby.